name is Natalie Colgrove, and I wanted to do a video
Google
today.
Fi, a phone plan
Oh,
by
hold on a
Google
second.
with our unlimited.
Didn't expect that. Well, I want to do a video today about wife swap. In the Victorian era, something that I never knew of. And, I don't think wife swap is a very good idea. It is never a good idea to do wife swap. For one, it doesn't look right. But it's my opinion, But today I was interested in wanting to watch about wife swap because I never thought that they would do that in the Victorian era. Here it's like you do it for show, and we don't do wife swap. I don't agree with that. But let's watch the Victorian era. I'm interested in that. All right.
Plus plan, you'll get unlimited data, calls, and texts.
Show wife swap. Well, that was basically Victorian England. Even now, in some communities and religions, divorce is looked down upon as unsavory or wrong, and great lengths are taken to avoid it. So go back a few hundred years and add on the British sense of propriety, traditional values, and the belief that women were property, and you can imagine the pearl clutching that suggesting divorce would induce. Unless, you were the King of England or something. Traipsing your wife around like a side of beef, however, was totally fine. Women sold as possessions at marketplaces was a practice that began in the 17th century and persisted right through the Victorian era till approximately the early 1900s, with the last recorded instance occurring in 1913. At the end of the day, even without the stigma, divorce was extremely expensive and simply out of reach to the poor and working class members of society, and until 1857 wasn't even possible without a private act of Parliament. And you can imagine how often that happened. So the only option remaining for the peasants of early modern England was wife selling. Apparently. That's not to say wife selling was super common. From the first recorded incident, an account of John Whitehouse in November 1692 to 1750, there were only 8 recorded incidences of it taking place. It appears that, slowly, over the next centuries, wife selling spread across England and, by the 1800s, it had grown exponentially in popularity, and was a more prominent practice in some parts of the country. 20th century historian E.P. Thompson combines his own research with cases recorded in Wives for Sale, a book by Samuel Pyatt Menefee, and confirms evidence of at least 400 cases of wife selling, the latest of which took place at the end of the 1800s. In 1797, The Times wrote an account of one such wife sale at Smithfield Market, showcasing that some, at least, found it a distasteful practice. On Friday, a butcher exposed his wife to sale in Smithfield Market, near the Ram Inn, with a halter about her neck and one about her waist, which tied her to a railing, when a hog driver was the happy purchaser, who gave the husband 3 guineas and a crown for his departed rib. Pity it is there is no stop put to such depraved conduct in the lower order of people. During the early 1800s, before and after Queen Victoria's coronation in 1837, several accounts of wife selling tell us that it was very much like taking cattle to market. The sale was announced in advance, and the wife would literally be paraded around the potential buyers with a halter around her neck or arm, and sometimes the children would be thrown in to boot. Whilst this all sounds, and is, highly offensive to modern ears, it does suggest the wife had no say in this, which wasn't always the case. Just like today, marriages sometimes didn't work out, and it wasn't always necessarily the husband on his own that wanted out. It could have been a prior discussion between both parties. However, as the man
Google Fi, a phone plan by Google. With our unlimited Plus plan, you'll get unlimited data, calls, and texts.
held all the power, it was up to him to sell his wife to her new partner, which in most cases it usually was. But it wasn't always the case that the wife was victim to the highest bidder. In many cases, the sale had been agreed in advance and was used as a symbol of separation and remarriage. A great example of this comes from Maidstone in January 1915, where John Osborne sold his wife and child to William Sargent for the high fee of £1. roughly £121 in today's money. And even if it was the case of the highest bidder, the sale could not be completed without the wife's approval. An 1854 report from Manchester showed an occasion where the wife was purchased for a high price, but not liking the purchaser, was put up again. And speaking of pricing, it seems that this could vary quite wildly. In some cases, a wife being sold for £100 and her children £25 each, as was the case of one sale from 1865. But more commonly, it was a secondary consideration and not actually the point of the sale, other than to prove a transaction had taken place. And so most paid simply a few shillings, or some beer, or sixpence. This also fed into where wife selling took place. Choosing a marketplace was significant, as the large crowds ensured the husband and wife's separation was witnessed by many, and demeaning as the halter was, it served a purpose, showing the transaction was complete when the purchaser took it from the previous husband, alongside with the exchange of money or goods. From 1760 to 1880, it seems the Northerners were the happiest to take part in wife selling, with the highest number of cases taking place in Yorkshire, despite the fame and popularity of Smithfield Market in London, both historically and at the time seen as one of the most prominent places of wife selling, with accounts of the market's infamous practices reaching as far as France, as Scottish author Robert Chambers noted in his 1864 book, The Book of Days, about a sale that occurred in 1832. The occasional instances of wife sale, while remarked by ourselves with little beyond a passing smile, have made a deep impression on our continental neighbours, who constantly cite it as an evidence of our low civilization. But despite the popularity of wife selling increasing through to the 1840s, by the mid-19th century it had begun to decline in popularity. This, in part, can be attributed to the Matrimonies Act of 1857, which shifted the legal proceedings of divorce to civil courts, meaning divorce was more attainable than it had been before. That being said, it still wasn't exactly fair, as a man just had to prove his wife had been adulterous to be granted a divorce, whereas women had to prove, on top of the adultery, that her husband had either been cruel, abandoned her, or participated in incest or bigamy. So, unsurprisingly, men still held the majority of the power. This did mean a decline in wife selling, and by the mid-1800s, the practice was seemingly only still occurring in the lowest working classes of Victorian society, and strongest in proto-industrial and rural communities. And what about vice versa? It might surprise you to know that husband selling wasn't entirely unheard of. Whilst there are only documented records of a handful of cases, and it was probably extremely rare, it did occasionally happen the other way around. However, what we need to remember here is that in Victorian England, women simply didn't have many rights and were kept by their husbands, who were responsible for their financial and all other types of security. If a husband abandons a wife, he abdicates his legal responsibility and can be imprisoned for it. And so, selling a wife to another man was a way to secure and ensure her financial safety, which would not be the case in the reverse. A woman who sold her husband would presumably immediately take up with someone else, as women had few to no ways to make money alone and would become the burden of their parish if single. Not something many women would be willing to do after being kept by a husband. Interestingly, despite papers condemning the practice of wife selling, there was never a law against the practice, and we have no records of any clergy outrightly condemning the practice. This leads us to conclude that, in fact, wife selling had the status of necessary evil, outwardly lauded as a distasteful practice, but in reality one that the necessity of was understood. The Times wrote an account on wife selling at Smithfield Market in 1797. On Friday, a butcher exposed his wife to sale in Smithfield Market, near the Ram Inn, with a halter about her neck and one about her waist, which tied her to a railing, when a hog driver was the happy purchaser, who gave the husband 3 guineas and a crown for his departed rib. If you like our Day in the Life of series, don't forget...
Oh, man, word. I would be so devastated if my husband did that, to get rid of me by selling me like that. Yeah, that was very evil to do in the era of days, but that was back then. I am so glad we're living today's society. Like and subscribe me.